Hi, my name is Reagan Mernan, and I am a second year doc student at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. I'm specializing in special education and literacy, and my research interests focus on writing interventions, especially regarding interventions that invoke background knowledge for essay writing for adolescents with learning disabilities. So, a little bit of background information regarding the importance of the work here today. Well, it can be argued that spelling is one of the most critical yet difficult skills in written communication. In order to accurately and reliably convey a message, spellings must accurately reflect sounds with appropriate letter correspondences and spelling conventions. Spelling development is a progression of code-based skills that for most students begins with phonemic awareness instruction. The ability to separate words into their individual sounds has been identified as a predictor of spelling achievement. So, we can see how this progression might begin in the early elementary grades, but might still be necessary for some students in the secondary setting, especially those with learning disabilities. Generally, our folks with learning disabilities display greater difficulty than their peers without disabilities in developing appropriate spelling strategies, which ultimately results in negative written performance outcomes. Due to the bidirectional relationship between reading and writing and the phonological skills that overlap considerably in reading and writing, typically students with spelling disabilities possess phonological deficits that also have a negative impact on reading performance. Because students with learning disabilities have difficulty mastering the phonological structure of language required to map the sounds of language to text, reading and spelling become challenging. This challenge is so pervasive that spelling has been documented as one of the most common difficulties for students with learning disabilities. Therefore, knowledge concerning effective instructional approaches and interventions in spelling is necessary for increased spelling proficiency for students with learning disabilities. So, I conducted a systematic literature review looking at spelling interventions for K-12 students with learning disabilities. This review expanded the work of Williams and colleagues from 2017, with one of the major differences being that this work is focused more holistically on spelling interventions. For example, I looked at the comparison of the types of spelling interventions in elementary settings versus secondary settings, the measures used for these interventions, the settings in which these interventions are employed, the intervention designs, and how research on spelling interventions are disseminated through journal outlets. 5 prominent electronic databases were searched, along with hand searches and ancestry and descendant searches, for relevant work that was limited to peer-reviewed sources, empirical studies, at least one of the defined elementary or secondary grades, and a publication year between 1990 and 2020. Studies were determined to be coded as elementary if they were inclusive of grades 1 through 4, and secondary if they were inclusive of grades 5 through 12. Because some studies did not list grades but rather ages, student ages 11 and 12 were coded as secondary. A variety of search terms were used in their truncated form, including learning disabilities, spelling and encoding, dyslexia, and other search terms relevant to popular spelling strategies such as peer tutoring, orthography, multisensory, alphabetic phonics, etc. Because this was a systematic review, I adopted the PRISMA statement to aid in the critical appraisal of the publications examined and as a reporting mechanism for the studies extracted and appraised. An initial database search yielded 1,067 results, which ultimately trickled down to a total of 39 studies to be included, 19 of which were elementary studies, and 20 of the studies were focused at the secondary setting. Each of these studies were coded in order to organize and extract the significant information from each study. Coding categories were decided a priori and included participant information, such as grade and age, setting, for example, secondary versus elementary, design information, so group, single case, etc., intervention information, such as type, and measures used. Results are as follows. Journal outlets for spelling interventions included 20 different journals, ranging from the Journal of Behavioral Education to the Journal of Special Education. The number of different journal outlets for spelling interventions for students with learning disabilities at the secondary level was 13, with the Journal of Behavioral Education yielding the most studies, 3. Studies at the elementary level spanned 9 different journals, with the Journal of Learning Disabilities being the primary outlet with 4 studies. The vast variety of journal outlets appears to demonstrate what Duke and Millett 2001 would consider an ecological balance, as evidenced by the seemingly lack of association between the variables of the journals, as a similar topic and population were published in diverse journal outlets. A one-on-one setting was the most popular intervention setting in the elementary environment, with 7 out of the 19 studies executing the intervention in this way. Similar to the elementary studies, a quote, resource room was overwhelmingly the majority setting, with 6 of the 20 studies being carried out in this setting. Single case design was the predominant design methodology in both elementary studies and secondary studies. Of the 19 elementary studies, 13 utilized single case design, and of the 20 secondary studies, 12 employed a single case design. As with the journal outlets, the intervention type among spelling interventions was immense, with 15 noted different elementary spelling interventions. The most common intervention focused on some type of error correction, such as cover, copy, and compare, with 3, and error correction, with 1. Similar to the most common elementary intervention, corrective spelling interventions such as cover, copy, and compare, 4, and self-correction variations, 3, were the most common in the secondary setting. The spelling intervention studies initiated a multitude of measures that ranged from standardized measures, teacher-generated word list, content area vocabulary words, compositions, and modified word lists. Although studies spanning elementary and secondary employed standardized spelling measures such as the Wide Range Reading Achievement Test, Ames-Webb 5th grade word lists, other studies utilized measures that not only lacked standardization, but also lacked clarity. 6 of the 20 elementary studies described spelling measures in rather ambiguous terms, such as, quote, students' spelling words, weekly spelling quizzes, or spelling words selected from the social studies series, The United States, Past and Present. Studies extracted from the secondary level were also peppered with ill-defined measures, such as, quote, weekly tests, grade-level spelling words, or vocabulary packets used in a current events class. Students in grade 4 were the dominant participants in the studies examined. It would be of value for research to examine younger students and students at the secondary levels in isolation. Because students with learning disabilities often struggle with spelling, it is vital to resolve how interventions can increase their spelling outcomes. Future research in these areas will add to the body of literature and strengthen evidence in terms of the effectiveness of specific interventions for students with learning disabilities. Further, those studies that were excluded due to their participants as, quote, at risk, especially in the early elementary grades, might have been representative of students with learning disabilities. Further, this synthesis did not include the impact of reading interventions on spelling outcomes for students with learning disabilities. Although the reciprocal relationship between reading and spelling is known, this relationship has not been investigated entirely for students with learning disabilities. It would be valuable for future research to not only address this relationship, but to examine the degree in which spelling interventions could affect reading outcomes. The majority of the studies included in this synthesis utilized a researcher-created measure of spelling, or vaguely described the measure as a, quote, weekly spelling list. Often these measures are proximal and typically are only evaluative of what students learned during the intervention, which generally shows stronger effects. While these methods offer valuable information regarding the degree of the participants' knowledge of their words learned, This process is unable to capture the participants' performance compared to their peers. Further, many of the studies focused solely on the accuracy of words taught and did not investigate the transfer of skills or unknown or untaught words. Future research should seek to investigate not only performance, but also the generalization of the skills taught in the intervention. Although this synthesis yielded intervention results pertaining to assistive technology, a potential limitation could be that neither technology nor computer assisted or other similar terms were included as part of the search procedures. This presents the awareness that studies involving technology could have been unintentionally excluded. Given the seemingly exponential increase in technology over the past decade, more research is needed to determine the potential outcomes of technology on spelling achievement for students with learning disabilities.